Diana Hargrove pointed at what she called trash on the screen. A charred skeleton the boardroom dismissed as worthless scrap, but their verdict was far from the truth. That car is dead. Anyone still holding on to hope is wasting my time. Naturally, the blind majority nodded along in agreement. Every single head except for one. Near the back doors, a quiet mechanic in grease-stained coveralls slowly raised his hand. "I can fix it." Mocking laughter rippled through the boardroom. Diana squinted to read his name tag, Owen Calloway, Bay Technician. She stared at the ruined prototype, then at him, flashing a cold, dismissive smile. "You have 30 days, she said. "Starting tomorrow morning. Get to work. Stick with me. You and I will see what reviving an impossible wreck actually looks like." Owen Calloway was not running away from his past. The blind masses saw failure and assumed he fled, but they were dead wrong. He was not hiding out in Dallas. He made a highly calculated pivot. The exact choice you make at 36, when being a father is your real foundation and everything else is noise. He realized a simpler, carefully crafted life, built on solid ground, was far better than a massive empire destined to crumble once more. He woke at 5:45 every single morning. His phone alarm played a quirky sound his little girl Emma had picked out. A loud rooster track that was annoying enough to wake him, but genuine enough to work. Dressing in the dark, he slipped into the kitchen and brewed a fresh pot. Then he slipped into Emma's room, sitting on her bed for exactly 4 quiet minutes. He never woke her up, he just sat there. A quiet ritual born during those incredibly dark months 3 years ago, when watching his kids sleep was the only cure for the panic racing inside his chest. The ritual remained long after the storm had cleared. Emma was 6 now. She had her mother's dark hair and Owen's habit of studying things deeply before making a judgment. She always carried a scruffy stuffed bear named Bolt. Because, as she explained to him with total focus, bears are built for speed. Owen never challenged her vision. Bolt went everywhere she did. To the grocery store, the local park, and that small table by the kitchen window. She would draw colorful shapes there every morning, while her dad mapped out his garage schedule. This specific Monday's roster listed a couple of routine transmission jobs. One standard brake inspection, plus a basic fluid swap on an old delivery van rotting in bay 3 way too long. Owen had been working as a mechanic at Hargrove Auto for 7 straight months. He took the job for the easy 40-minute drive to Emma's daycare and the steady pay. Also because the shop foreman who hired him never dug deep or asked questions. On paper, Owen only claimed 10 simple years of basic auto repair work. He never mentioned that for a decade, he was the genius running Calloway Restoration Works. You and I know vision sees past scrap. His dad built that shop from nothing over 3 decades. A legendary garage that revived classic cars the rest of the world dismissed as total junk. A garage that became famous in high-end collector circles across the Southwest as the only hope for impossible classic rebuilds. He kept his past hidden because the shop was gone. No dramatic failure, just a quiet end. Look closely with me. After Rachel died, the crowd watched his old life crumble. First the contracts, then the crew. Impatient clients walked away, and soon the public assumed the garage was a lost cause. Sold off cheap to settle the heavy debts that grief and sudden absence left behind. Owen simply watched his life work vanish, offering no resistance to their verdict. The man was completely exhausted, and honestly, he had no desire to prove them wrong. Without her, Phoenix felt like a hollow shell. The entire city just looked wrong. Dallas was no magical cure, but a clean slate was all he really needed. Within 2 weeks, Marcus Webb saw past the wreckage and recognized Owen's rare mechanical genius. The other mechanics laughed and called him crazy, but Marcus knew the majority was wrong. Owen Calloway could simply place his bare hand onto the hood of any car, close his eyes for 30 seconds, and diagnose a buried engine flaw far better than their expensive corporate computer systems. He never tried justifying his gift. He said the metal spoke to him, sharing secrets that ordinary mechanics were too blind to ever hear. To the average wrench turner, that claim sounded like total, worthless nonsense. Yet it was likely the absolute truth. Then came that fateful Monday morning. Owen was crossing the lot when a massive flatbed truck rumbled through the main gates. He sensed the presence immediately. Before even looking, he heard the heavy rattle of a rig carrying dead weight, something massive, ruined and shifting with every bump. Turning around, he saw a mysterious shape completely buried beneath a dusty canvas tarp, yet even hidden under canvas. The silhouette was undeniable. You and I recognize that legendary profile if we appreciate true vintage performance. Owen stopped dead in his tracks. He analyzed those hidden contours for a moment, then quietly returned to his routine labor. That wrecked masterpiece on the trailer began its chaotic journey at a Hamtramck plant in Michigan during the autumn of 1969. Its history of survival was violently complicated. A 1970 Plymouth Hemi Cuda convertible, finished in that legendary vitamin C orange paint. A shade so loud that people swore it practically glowed in a dark parking lot. Even brand new, the machine was already a rare ghost. Today it was a legendary survivor. Out of that entire original run, only 14 convertibles packing that roaring 426 Hemi motor and the 4-speed manual transmission actually survived the years. Victor Ashton held the title to one. At 62, Ashton had spent 40 ruthless years conquering business, extracting massive wealth from real estate and the Texas energy sector. The man was never driven by cheap nostalgia. He was calculating, patient, and projected a cold confidence that rivals in corporate boardrooms found deeply unsettling, especially when he was quietly dismantling their entire portfolios. He bought that neglected Cuda at a private auction last year, spending $900,000 cash. A bargain for its true potential, but far too risky for the short-sighted crowd in that room. No quick flips or museum shows. He wanted a complete restoration to prove this legend wasn't dead. Because, stick with me on this, real greatness is far too personal to explain to a room of doubting investors. You see, his father once owned a Barracuda painted in that exact same factory shade. But that classic ride was totally ruined. Lost to ashes during a 1978 warehouse fire when Victor was only 14. Such pain at 14 shapes a man. You and I know he will either run forever or bleed himself dry trying to rebuild what was lost. Let us go back 3 weeks before that high-level board meeting. A sudden fire tore directly through the Hargrove vehicle storage facility, right where the classic Barracuda sat, waiting for its vintage restoration evaluation. Raging fire absolutely destroyed 60% of the outer metal body. Overhead sprinklers completely flooded the whole engine bay. The metal chassis baked in extreme heat, then froze under icy water. The frame warped, severely twisting the main rail out of alignment. Sandra's crew measured a horrific 12mm frame bend. She managed the entire engineering division over at Hargrove Automotive. She brought 5 corporate experts. They studied that ruined chassis for 11 days before announcing their ultimate conclusion. Their decision was cold, analytical, and completely heartless. Rebuilding the vintage car would simply cost more than its actual market value. To the majority, this charred shell was just hopeless, unsalvageable junk. Victor Ashton listened to her grim report from the far end of the boardroom table. He remained quiet, but when she finished, he asked one very simple question. "Is there anyone here," he asked, "who actually believes they can rebuild this?" No one spoke. Victor gave a quiet nod, finished his coffee, and walked out. Diana Hargrove was 38, and she had run her family's empire for 5 years. Before taking charge, she spent 7 tough years proving herself to the board, even to her doubtful father, that she understood the car industry much better than any other candidate. She held a degree from Rice and a massive finance background from Wharton. She used those credentials like a sharp scalpel, cold, efficient, and empty of emotion, always bending the numbers to fit the corporate outcome she had already chosen. Under her strict leadership, revenues climbed 18% every year for 5 straight years. Business magazines had even labeled her the Iron Wheel of Dallas. It was a title she secretly hated but never cared to fight. She organized this Monday meeting because the ruined car required a final choice. Hesitation was unacceptable. She reviewed the grim technical report all weekend, running the numbers 3 different ways. She reached the very same conclusion: the car was a total loss to be scrapped. They should take the insurance money and simply walk away. She felt no joy in breaking this harsh reality to Victor Ashton. Victor was far more than just another client. He was their primary outside investor. But to a practical mind like Diana's, emotion was a useless waste of time before the spreadsheets balanced, never a second sooner. She closed her binder and delivered the majority's final, hopeless ruling. She was already moving to the next item when a quiet mechanic named Owen raised his hand. "You and I know how the story goes." She glared at him like an error code, first with sharp annoyance, then icy calculation. He waited silently near the massive exit door. They only brought him in to confirm a minor detail in Sandra's hopeless report. And he did just that, standing with a quiet certainty they couldn't shake. Not young anymore, but seasoned enough to know better. His calloused hands knew real work. Now, before 44 blind executives, he spoke his truth. Facing Victor Ashton directly, he vowed to save what 5 corporate experts dismissed as worthless junk. "Have you read Sandra's entire report?" she snapped. "Yes. And you still believe you can fix this in 30 days? I don't care about their timeline. Mine is 30 days." The room fell dead silent under a heavy, doubting gaze. The executives were dying to laugh, but his absolute quiet certainty stopped them cold. Victor Ashton sat in silence at the far end of the table. He studied Owen with a knowing look that sailed right over the heads of the crowd. There was no mockery in his eyes, only deep, deliberate focus. "Diana," Victor quieted his voice, murmuring, "let the man try." Diana glanced between them, then glared down at the photo of that seemingly hopeless classic car. She snatched a digital timer straight off her presentation podium. She slapped the clock down hard on the edge of the boardroom table. 8 a.m. tomorrow, she warned. "If you fail, you know the consequences." Owen stared at the timer. I know. He didn't look at the doubters surrounding him. He just took his folder, turned away from their blindness, and walked out the door. That evening, Owen picked up Emma from daycare at 5:15. She came running through the door, her stuffed toy dangling wildly by one arm. But she could immediately see a change in her father's expression. She stopped suddenly, just 2 feet away. She examined him with wide eyes before stepping in for a hug. "Did something happen?" she asked. He carried her to the car. "Ba took on a hard challenge today." He easily drifted between English and the Vietnamese word for dad, and Emma loved both. "But I know the answer." She pondered this while he buckled her in. "Is it a giant car? Very big?" "Okay," she said, flipping her toy's ear. That was her way of deciding the issue was settled. He quickly made pasta for dinner. Emma sat at the small table coloring with her crayons as he cooked. After dinner, she proudly showed off a picture of a car that was finally healing. It was just a messy orange scribble, but he saw the vision and tucked it away. Once Emma fell asleep, he reopened Sandra's engineering report to find the truth. 47 pages laid out before him alongside a mug of black coffee. Her work was incredibly detailed. But here's what you and I see that the experts missed. Her elite team was totally wrong. The bent chassis was never a result of intense heat from the fire. It was only a broken weld joint on the secondary crossmember, meaning the main structure was fully intact and easily saved without new parts. The engine looked rough, but it wasn't the lost cause the executives claimed. Water had flooded the carburetor through the intake while they put out the fire. Yet the engine bore remained pristine, showing no signs of locking under pressure. Such damage only occurs if the engine is running when water hits. Looking at the timeline, the engine was definitely cold and silent. Most saw only scrap, but failure is the majority's conclusion, not the final truth. The melted wiring looked hopeless, just copper ruined by a fire. Every inch past the firewall demanded a complete rebuild from the original blueprints. Fortunately, Owen possessed those exact blueprints. His father had copied factory service manuals for every classic muscle car built from 1964 to 1972. He guarded those grease-stained binders the way most men protect priceless family photos. They sat hidden under heavy blankets in his closet, untouched since the day he packed up and moved to Dallas. He pulled up to the quiet facility at 10 o'clock that night. Phil, the quiet night shift security guard, was on duty. He had witnessed enough late-night miracles to simply stop asking any questions. He silently handed over the keycard Diana had activated for all-night garage access. Let's follow him through the empty shop, straight to the bay holding that crushed CUDA. He stood there in silence, staring at the wreckage under harsh yellow lights. He placed his hand on the charred, twisted hood. It was his quiet ritual, the way he always greeted a classic car for the first time. 3 minutes passed in complete stillness. The entire building was dead silent. But to Owen, the majority's verdict of death was not the truth. It was a wounded animal, beaten and abandoned by corporate suits who refused to listen. Opening his notebook, he began writing. There was no need for fancy diagnostic software. He relied on his late father's old green composition book to map the rebuild. The pages were split between his father's faded handwriting and his own, in 2 columns. Left side, the surface failure. Right side, the glorious truth hidden underneath. By 1:30 a.m. he had 7 pages of notes and a plan he knew, with an unshakable certainty built entirely on years of dirty fingernails, not empty arrogance. Would actually work, he glanced over. At the glowing digital timer Diana left sitting on the edge of the workbench. Someone placed it there, perhaps as a ticking reminder or maybe a cruel joke. Owen picked the clock up, studied the flashing numbers, and calmly set it down. 30 days, he whispered to the twisted metal, to himself and to the empty room. He drove home, grabbed exactly 4 hours of sleep, and returned by 6 a.m. For those first 3 days, Owen worked completely solo, no favors asked, none offered. He began by gutting whatever ruined interior pieces were left. The trashed seats, the shattered dashboard, and the melted, reeking carpet. You and I might see junk on that floor, but he organized it to separate trash from treasure. Marcus swung by on day 2, stared at the precise grid of parts on the concrete floor, and walked away silent. He came back just in wog. Hour later with 2 coffees, leaving one outside the bay door without ever knocking. Sandra Howell finally showed up on day 4. She walked in unannounced, standing directly in front of the massive blueprint Owen had taped to the wall. It was a hand-drawn map charting every wrecked zone against the muscle car's original bones. She stood there silently studying it for 4 minutes. "You're spending time on the secondary crossmember," she finally said. "We assessed that, I know. The frame rail deviation is coming from that busted weld, not the rail itself." She went totally silent. "We had that exact note in the preliminary. It never made the final report." Another long pause. "No," she quietly admitted. "It wasn't." She walked out. Owen just kept grinding. Day 10 of the project brought Victor Ashton, completely unannounced. He quietly appeared at the garage entrance around 7 p.m., just as the rest of the shop was clearing out. You and I know the type. Jacket on, clutching a paper cup, pretending this classic rebuild check-in was just some random detour. He lingered at the Kilby doorway, watching Owen coax life into the cold steel, completely silent. Owen felt him there, but the master mechanic never stopped wrenching. Finally, Victor broke the silence. "You know what color that is?" It wasn't a question. Owen set down his wrench. "Vitamin C, FC7. Victor nodded slowly. "My father's car was the exact same color." Owen stared right at him. He already knew. He had overheard Victor admit it 3 days before the boardroom condemned the project, taking a private call in the lot. But he kept that quiet truth hidden, calmly holding the CEO's gaze. Victor broke eye contact first, looking back at the battered metal frame. Silence stretched deep between them. For a quiet visionary like Owen, this was likely the most meaningful conversation he had shared in a very long time. On day 9, he spent $3,400 of his own cash on rare muscle car parts from Michigan. Marcus caught wind of the purchase and called him that night. "You know they are not going to reimburse that," Marcus warned him. "I do not know that." "Oh, Marcus." Heavy silence followed. "You are either the most brilliant mechanic I have ever seen," Marcus sighed, "or a guy having a very slow breakdown." "Both are entirely possible," Owen replied. On day 16, Diana walked into the auto shop around 7 p.m., completely unannounced. Owen was deep in a weld, mask down, sparks flying, completely unaware of her arrival. She leaned against the doorway with her arms crossed, quietly watching. "Let us watch a master at work." He routed the fuel lines with absolute precision, every single movement dialed in. She watched for 15 minutes before he finally lifted his mask. He did not even flinch. "What do you need?" he asked. "Just looking," she murmured. "At the fuel lines." "At the craftsmanship." He set his welding torch down. "I need $8,700 for the wiring harness. I already spent $3,400. She paused. "Send the invoice request directly through Sandra." He nodded. "The $3,400? Send that too." Then she left. 2 days passed with no explanation and no corporate follow-ups. Just a single word in the subject line, sending his impossible budget request back fully approved. He sent Marcus a quick picture of the email. Marcus immediately texted back 3 question marks and nothing else. Diana approved it, then started doing something she would not admit to herself for days. She quietly monitored the classic car rebuild, bypassing any formal reports. Every evening she began taking the long route through the facility to her car, a path that led right past the glass window looking down into the repair bay. "You and I see the shift happen once a day, then twice." She casually questioned Sandra, keeping her tone incredibly relaxed, asking if there was any new assessment on the restoration's progress. Sandra hesitated slightly before giving her answer. "That custom crossmember work he did," she whispered. "I do not think there is another mechanic in Dallas who could shape that by hand. Look closely with me." To most, these machines had failed. Diana simply nodded, dismissing the wreckage as bad data, and walked away. She never questioned the verdict, having grown up just adjacent to this automotive empire. For years, she watched her father practically worship these classic cars. She heard his voice soften for raw muscle cars, speaking of them like priceless masterpieces. Blind to their true value, she only saw cold metrics, operational efficiency, and rising profit margins. Yet Owen Calloway possessed a quiet brilliance, never rushing and never showing off. His disregard for the crowd sparked a quiet respect she couldn't calculate on a spreadsheet. Day 22 finally arrived. Little Emma joined Owen because her daycare was closed for a teacher training day. He settled his daughter in the waiting room with picture books and some colorful crayons, right as the CEO walked past on her way to the afternoon board meeting. She noticed the small girl sitting perfectly straight on the chilly lobby bench. A small stuffed bear sat right beside her. Engrossed in her book with absolute focus, she made the CEO stop. A receptionist leaned over, whispering that the child belonged to the mechanic. "He is down in the service bay." Diana silently studied the little girl's face. Emma looked up, instantly sensing the executive's heavy gaze the way intuitive kids do. She met the powerful woman's stare with absolute, quiet confidence. "Hi," Emma said. "Hi," Diana answered before the child returned to her book. Diana hurried to her boardroom, later once the main lobby had cleared out completely. A small box of shortbread cookies had been left quietly on the girl's bench, without any note left behind. "Watch this shift with me." 4 nights before the launch, Diana stepped inside, sitting near his workbench. Owen was molding the panels, resurrecting the damaged metal right under the fresh primer. He carefully blended the classic vitamin C orange paint, matching it to tiny flakes saved from the wreckage. The corporate leader watched his mastery in silence before finally speaking up. "Why did you hide who you were before our board meeting?" He kept sanding. "Because my name had nothing to do with saving this car. It mattered to me." "Maybe," he said, "but the classic vehicle didn't care." She gazed at the restored frame, that bright orange paint cutting through the gray primer. The gleaming chrome was reborn, proving the true genius behind this forgotten masterpiece. "I called this junk," she admitted. "You just followed what the metrics told you." She looked at him. "That is incredibly kind. No, it is just true. You read the standard report and saw 12 millimeters of frame rail damage. Most people would write it off too, yet you clearly did not. I saw the underlying masterpiece." The corporate boss fell silent for a moment. The steady sounds of the workshop filled the silence, the sweep of a cloth and metal tools tapping the bench. "You and I rarely hear this. I was wrong. No boardroom excuses." Owen gave a simple nod. "So what became of your old shop?" she asked. The quiet genius paused, gently setting his sanding block down. "My wife died," he said. No self-pity, just a devastating truth that changed his entire life path. Diana offered no empty condolences, showing a silent respect he deeply appreciated. "And Emma?" she asked. "She was only 3. What about the shop?" "I could only save one. I chose her." He quietly went back to work. Diana sat quietly on that stool for 20 more minutes, finally seeing beyond the apparent standstill. That heavy silence between them, it was progress, not discomfort. Day 28, 11 p.m. "You and I will see if conviction triumphs over doubt as Owen turns the key." Nothing. To most, that silent engine meant total failure. No cough, no stutter, not a single sound to hint at the life hidden deep inside. To the majority, it was dead, just cold metal with no intention of ever running again. Gripping the wheel, Owen stared ahead. He did not accept defeat because he knew the truth. With total clarity, he realized the timing was just temporarily misaligned. That rare distributor he tracked down was still the perfect fit for this engine. But the connection between the new points and the vintage carburetor was off. Or maybe it was the vacuum advance hidden in some 60-year-old document, written by long-gone engineers who calibrated everything in a pristine facility. He lacked their original gear, leaving things temporarily out of alignment. But he knew how to solve it. He had to do it by hand, just his eyes and ears, no modern diagnostic tools allowed. The crowd would call these tiny turns useless, but true greatness lies in invisible hairline adjustments. It was an old secret his father taught him, handed down on a vintage Charger back in Phoenix when Owen was only 14. Just a quiet Saturday with golden sunlight slicing through the dusty shop air. His father's hands moved with a rare patience, proving that mastering a craft simply takes the time it takes. Only 15 hours left when Marcus called at midnight. "Well?" Owen explained the setback. Marcus went silent. "How long to fix?" 9 hours if I'm lucky, 15 if I'm not." Another silence. "Need some company?" "No, but thanks anyway." Marcus shifted on the line. "You are actually going to do it," Marcus said, knowing his resolve. Owen did not reply. He just climbed out of the CUDA and opened his notebook. By 6 a.m., little Emma called from the neighbor's house where she had stayed. She could sense the breakthrough happening without needing to be told. "Dad, are you all right? You never came home." "I'm okay. I'm almost done. The big car, the big car." "Did it wake up yet?" Owen closed his tired eyes. "Not quite yet, but it's going to. I know," she whispered. "You always fix things, Dad, even the really broken stuff." He slumped on the greasy shop floor, holding the phone in the quiet room. "Go eat your breakfast now. I will pick you up around noon." "Okay," she said sweetly. "Tell the big car I said hi." He worked straight through the morning, micro-adjusting the distributor, testing the ignition, listening deeply, refusing to give up. "Let's pause. You and I see what onlookers mistake for a hopeless struggle. Just a tired mechanic turning a tiny metal part fractions of an inch. But the world mistakes patience for failure. There is no instruction manual for this kind of belief. You cannot search for this online. You simply listen, feel, and persist. You match every vibration to a standard of perfection that only exists in your mind. Built from 20 years of reviving discarded engines, while the crowd declared them dead. 8:17 p.m., day 29. The master finally sat behind the wheel of that legendary 1970 Plymouth Hemi CUDA. He reached out, gripped the key, and turned it. The engine didn't hesitate. That huge 426 Hemi roared to life, settling into a rhythm that proved the doubters completely wrong. Purely alive. A deep, steady rumble flooded the shop, vibrating straight through the cold concrete floor. It struck his chest behind the wheel like a real physical force. It was pure relief when everyone else saw a scrap pile, but you knew it would rise. Owen gripped the wheel for a solid 60 seconds, staying completely frozen in place. The motor hummed as he monitored the idle, steady, clean, flawless. He listened to the valve train, utterly quiet, exactly right. He followed the exhaust roar through the pipes, not a single bad note to find. He grabbed his phone to call Emma, though it was late and she was asleep. She answered after 4 rings, sounding completely exhausted. "Babe, I finished it," he told her. "The car woke up?" He grinned. It was the very first time he had smiled in 30 hours. The machine was awake. By the next morning, day 30 thick canvas covered the doors, hiding the miracle those corporate suits swore was impossible. A tow truck sat waiting just in case, but they wouldn't need that backup today. The CEO, Victor Ashton, arrived at 7 with his coffee, sitting silently near the garage as if he had nothing to say. A few folks from Sandra's crew trickled in, grouping up by the far wall. Victor's corporate buddies arrived as well, carrying early invites from last week promising a real show. They huddled near the shop doors, buzzing with that polite, confused energy you get when executives are told to show up completely blind. Diana Hargrove pulled up at 8:59. She wore a sharp jacket, holding a coffee that went ice cold during her drive. She stood right beside Victor, staring at the blocked garage doors in total silence. At 9 a.m., those heavy doors cracked open. See for yourself, that 1970 Plymouth Hemifacuda rolled right into the Dallas sun. The paint hit you first, vitamin C orange FC7. It was so bright it practically fought against the pale morning sky. This wasn't just salvaged, this was undeniable truth, proving the skeptics wrong. Just like the Detroit builders intended, wearing paint designed to make everyone stare. Gleaming chrome caught the bright sun from every single angle. The top was down, tucked neatly right behind the back row. And beneath that flawless skin, carrying the heavy thunder of a motor built by a master, came the sound. The crowd gathered outside the garage was hardly the sentimental type. Just corporate suits, engineers, and wealthy investors. Yet that mighty rumble silenced their chatter instantly. Not simply because it was loud, but because it was flawless. A finely tuned 426 hits a pitch completely different from any other engine from the golden era of muscle cars. And if you have heard it once, you never forget it. Even if 40 long years have passed since the last time. You and I know the truth. Victor Ashton hadn't heard that sound since age 14. Then Owen calmly walked out, showing everyone the real truth. Picture this. He wore the exact same uniform from that boardroom meeting 30 days ago, where they blindly declared him a failure. You could still see the grease on his wrist, the mark of a man who refused to accept their consensus. He carried no slick portfolio. Men who breathe life back into dead metal don't need to boast. The mechanic stood by the resurrected machine, watching the corporate leader slowly step toward the undeniable truth. The executive paused, laying his palm directly onto the pristine hood of his supposed failure. He touched it like a visionary, feeling the pulse that the blind majority insisted was dead. Victor froze, staring at the physical proof of his own error. 10 seconds crawled by, 15. Finally, his rigid guard crumbled under the overwhelming weight of realizing just how wrong he was. The CEO was 62. He had survived 5 decades of corporate combat, never once allowing the world to see him falter or bleed. Owen stood firm. He kept his gaze locked, refusing to offer cheap pity to the defeated giant. Sometimes the greatest respect is letting the bitter weight of a corrected mistake sink in deeply. Sandra, the chief engineer, cautiously approached the passenger side of the vehicle. She knelt to inspect the body, desperate to find the flaws her report had guaranteed. Tracing the flawless seams, she saw how perfectly every panel aligned against her expert predictions. She circled this living miracle twice before stopping to face the man who saved it. "That structural crossmember," she muttered. "You have to explain to me how you pulled this off." He explained his process, and she hung on every single detail. When he finished, she admitted, "My initial damage report was totally wrong. You just lacked the right lens to see what was hiding underneath." She locked eyes with him. "That is the second time you've told someone that, and you're right both times." She nodded, finally realizing she had joined the blind crowd in calling a masterpiece complete garbage. Across the garage, Diana stood completely paralyzed by the sight. She watched her fellow executive stand defeated, his eyes closed against the brilliant reality of his error. A sudden suffocating wave of regret washed over her, an unfamiliar feeling she couldn't name. Owen strolled over. She spun around. Stopping a few feet away, he let the silence stretch between them in the cool morning air. "You won this," she whispered. "It was never a competition," he replied. "That's his car. I simply brought it back." She looked toward the shining vehicle. She watched Victor's stunned face, then turned to the mechanic. "I swore it was absolute scrap." "You had fair reasons. You saw trash, but I listened and heard something you missed." She just waited, he answered, something still breathing. Suddenly, the rapid slap of tiny sneakers hitting concrete shattered the quiet garage. Little Emma sprinted through the open side door, holding her favorite toy tightly. Marcus had rushed her over at Owen's request, but no one had bothered to warn her about the stunning truth waiting inside. She froze 10 feet from the bumper, her jaw dropping in utter amazement. The restored Plymouth Cuda rumbled loudly. It was blazing orange, and it was absolutely massive, easily the most fierce, alive-looking machine she had ever witnessed in her 6 years of life. "Bah," she gasped softly. "Bah, it's so pretty." Owen quickly crossed the garage floor and scooped the little girl into his arms. She wrapped her arms around his neck, leaning back to stretch a tiny hand toward the muscle car in a serious greeting. "Hello, car," she chirped. "My bah fixed you up. You're completely better now." Because we both know that the majority's quick verdict is never the final truth. Their shocked gasps proved greatness can't be hidden forever. You and I heard that sound. The sound of skeptics stunned by pure truth. The majority never sees real greatness coming. Behind the wheel, Victor Ashton heard that truth too. Opening his eyes, he peered through the glass at the mechanic and his young daughter. For the first time today, a genuine smile broke through. Victor slowly guided that rebuilt machine around the lot, a deliberate silent lap of total victory. Driving like a man holding priceless treasure, a truth he waited a lifetime to hear roaring again. That vintage Hemi engine echoed across the lot, the roar of a masterpiece resurrected from the grave they dug for it. Diana stood there, utterly speechless. Her coffee had been ice cold for an hour. She did not care one bit. First thing the next morning, Diana called Owen into her office. She offered him a brand new position, a role nobody had ever held before. She had designed this brand new job late last night, sitting alone in a completely empty corporate building. Director of Classic Automotive Restoration. Complete technical control over every single vintage rebuild project. Triple his previous pay, Owen just sat there, processing the offer. He finally spoke. "I want final say on all technical decisions, granted. If I say something is impossible, you accept that without questioning me." Diana hesitated. Finally, she nodded. "Deal," he replied. "I am in." Soon after, Victor demanded a meeting. The old executive slid over a thick envelope. Owen peeked at the massive check and pushed it back. "I cannot accept this." Victor stared at him. "Why not?" "Because money is not why I did it." The old boss leaned back, studying the quiet mechanic who looked far beyond mere money. "Then tell me why you did it." A heavy silence filled the office. "Stick with me here. My father taught me that a car is never truly dead if someone is still willing to listen to it. I heard yours listening." Victor snatched up the thick envelope, shoving it right back to him. "Then consider this tuition for Emma." The old man smiled. "Not payment from the owner." Owen looked down at the money, then back up at Victor. He finally accepted the envelope. Later, Sandra tracked him down in the workshop. They assigned him a massive corner bay, great lighting, custom storage, the ideal workspace for reviving forgotten machines. She lingered quietly at the doorway, her hands shoved deep in her pockets. That timing adjustment on the Hemi, she finally spoke up. "Would you teach me?" Owen looked up from his workspace. "Yes. But you must put that diagnostic software away first." She blinked. "For how long?" "For as long as it takes to trust what you hear, instead of what a computer screen tells you." A long pause. "How long did it take you?" "My father started teaching me at 12. I finally got it right at 14. Sandra stood frozen, then nodded and grabbed a workshop stool. A week later, Owen worked late into the night. 3 massive rebuilds were lined up already. A massive workload for a classic division the skeptics declared dead just 30 days ago. Diana walked past the bay just as her long shift ended. "You and I recognize greatness when we see it." She stopped, no longer managing, just admiring the true artistry. "How is Emma?" she asked. Owen paused and looked up. It completely caught him off guard, a genuinely human question. For a brief moment he just sat there, absorbing her quiet kindness. "She read 3 words in a row this morning." He smiled, completely on her own. Diana tilted her head. 3, for her that is the whole world. A quiet silence lingered. "The majority hears nothing, but we hear potential taking root." "Do you want coffee?" she asked. "I know a place nearby." "Emma's with Marcus, so you have time." Owen dropped his worn wrench. He did not analyze her like a broken engine, he simply looked. Then he quietly reached for his jacket. Later that night, Owen sat at his table, looking at his father's worn mechanic notebook open before him. The page from 30 days ago still detailed the wreckage and his supposedly impossible diagnosis. He studied what the majority called junk for a moment, then turned to a blank page. Right there, he wrote down 3 new project names. He glanced at Emma's sketch of the broken orange car slowly finding new life. The majority saw a messy scribble, but they saw a Plymouth Cuda waiting underneath. He picked up his pencil. He slowly wrote a 4th name. 3 weeks ago, the corporate CEO declared this classic car was scrap metal. To them, she was right. They only saw the broken surface, but you and I know data is worthless without a real vision. That essential missing piece had been a quiet father who learned his craft in a dusty Phoenix garage. He knew the line between worthless failure and a waiting masterpiece comes down to this: having the courage to ignore the noise and being patient enough to find the greatness hidden underneath. Owen Calloway proved it 30 days later, gleaming in vitamin C orange under the Dallas sun. The ruined machine, that the majority swore was dead, roared out into the sun to reveal the final truth.